There has been a ton of talk about the Hypnosis Mic franchise and the recent movie and how it can be potentially the ending, and people are going crazy about the idea of the project ending. Others are actually already coming to terms that the project may end sooner than later, and others are thinking, hell no, the project is of course not going to end. However, the big question is, when is the perfect time to end a 2D music project? Because that's the big conversation here. I'm not going to talk specifically about the Hypnosis Mic franchise, but in this episode let's talk about the perfect time to end the 2D music project so that I would say most of the people are actually satisfied with what we have at the end. So let's start this episode of Seiyuu Lounge. Welcome to Seiyuu Lounge, I'm your host Vanessa, and in this episode, unscripted, we are going to talk about the big topic, which is when is the perfect time to end a 2D music project, because this talk is usually something that we don't want to talk about, because as fans we want a project to stick around for as long as possible, we don't want it to end. However, at times, even as fans, we can recognize that the project is dragging for too long. I feel that most of you will have that sensibility to understand that while I love this project has been around for so long, why not just end while they are riding on a really good high, or when they are with a ton of momentum. So I feel that this is really something really interesting that we need to talk about, of course. That's why I brought this conversation here, because let's talk about a little bit of a, let's say, this is almost adjacent to the main topic, but it makes sense to talk about because last year we had, of course, the announcement of the end of Lolo-D, and many people were kind of shocked. Why did that project actually end? It doesn't make any sense whatsoever for a group that is considered at that moment the very best 2D group out there, but honestly, no bias into this conversation. It was quite honestly the best music group really out there. Their music was unique, their voices were at a level that no other 2D group has. Their lineup was the most cohesive, their composer is one of the best in Japan, so everything was working really well. What happened there is that the group started with storyline. Even if they joined the project really late, they actually started with a storyline, and it seems that the creators already knew the ending. So the group already started with borrowed time, and that's why the time was ticking. I feel that's the connection that I make, is that when they joined the project, the time was already ticking for them to say goodbye. And every time that we listened to that clock ticking in their songs, which appeared in almost all their songs, it was a consistent motif across their songs, we were not associating that to a potential end, but eventually that was the end when the clock stopped ticking. So from a narrative perspective, from a storyline perspective, it is genius, and it is really good to see that the project thought about, let's nail a really cohesive storytelling here. Let's make the group join at a specific point and wrap up at a specific point, and have every single of their actions to be justified by the storytelling, their music as well, and everything ties up pretty well with the drama that every single character in this group has, and then the group as a whole has as well. I feel, while most people will look at that and think, well, why would you even create such a small or short story for a group that had so much potential? But think from a different perspective with me. First of all, I'm a massive fan of theirs. If you actually watched the episodes on the YouTube channel, or even if you listen to the podcast episodes, I was mentioning Lolo-D almost all the time. I almost immediately became a massive fan of theirs, and they quickly jumped to my all-time favorite 2D group. I really felt the blow when they announced the end, because I was really not believing that it was the end. Really? Are they going to end? I'm not so sure. Actually, they were pretty sure, so I was the one that was in disbelief. But let's think from one perspective. As fans, we don't want the project to end. We want more music, we want more experiences, we want more story, we want more of the characters. If you are like me, you want more of the storytelling interwoven with the music, because I like good storytelling, I like good stories being developed across songs, and the songs actually complementing the story and the story complementing the music. I love that, and Lolody did that really well. But if you look from a different perspective, let's say a storytelling perspective only, if you are a writer, you were hired to write the story for the characters, and usually what happens into the music projects, and it is something that ends up hindering a project, is that the writers are hired to write a story that is ever evolving or that won't ever end, so there are no arcs in a story. And that's why some projects, for example, the Ensemble Stars franchise ends up having a storyline that is a tad weird because they changed so many times writers that there's almost no cohesive point in the story. If not for some fans actually putting the story together, it would make mostly no sense. So if you actually hire someone and you say, okay, this group is going to have an arc, a story arc within this franchise. Let's say, in this case, it was within the Hanadol franchise. We are going to have this group here. They are going to end at a specific point. We want their storyline to actually be interwoven into the lyrics, and we want to actually know how the story starts and ends so that we can create the CDs around that. And I feel this is the best way to actually tell a story within a 2D group, although you will feel that, well, I like the stories to be more of the type that they are changing with fan interaction, for example, like it is, for example, with the Hypnosis Mag franchise, in which fans actually vote for who will win, at the same time for the Paradox Live franchise, in which the same happens. But in this case, the story is created by someone, they already know the start and the end, and it makes sense because from a storytelling point, you want to have a start, a middle, and an end for a story to feel satisfying. And what happens usually with 2D music projects is that they start with a bang, their middle of the story is really weak, and then either they end out of nowhere, they disappear, the project is cancelled, or the story continues, but there's no evolution whatsoever in the storytelling. It's the same old story that they started telling at the start, and it is dragging and dragging and dragging, and no one evolves, no character grows, either age or personality-wise or actions-wise. So you will feel that something is happening, but nothing is happening at the same time. I feel that it makes most sense for a story to be thought about from a storytelling perspective. For example, let's imagine that I create a 2D franchise. I will say this franchise is going to last 5 years. I'm going to have a specific budget for this franchise. I'm going to have 2 groups, and the 2 groups are going to go from rookie idols to superstars. So in 5 years, I'm going to have people vote and everything else, being that the final vote is them winning the award that will make them superstars, let's say. And I'm going to write a story from start to finish, including all those variants in which fans can vote for one group or the other to actually get that award. But I'm going to write a story from start to finish. I will let you know that regardless if it is me writing or someone professional writing or someone else doing that job, if you tell a writer that they have a start and an end for a story and they need to create that, the story is going to sound much more cohesive than saying that, yeah, you are joining this project in which there are X amount of idols and X amount of groups, and this is the storyline, let's say, idols try to become famous. And you are writing episodes. You are not writing a story, you are writing episodes within a storyline, which you don't know how it's going to end, you only know how it started. And that's almost like trying to invent a story at the drop of the hat, which is not ideal. You want to actually think through when you are creating a story. You want people to feel invested in the story, root for the characters, want to listen to the music. If it has an anime adaptation, you want them to watch as well. If it has a game, you want them to play the game and get excited about it. If you are talking about birthdays of the characters, you want people to engage, to participate in events, online or offline. So you are thinking about a ton of activations when it comes to marketing. And that is all tied up to the story. If you create a really good story from start to finish with a point A, B to Z, you actually have everything. You have the perfect formula for a project to work. The problem is, and why this is not as common, is that 2D music franchises are thinking about revenue, and the creators of those projects think about the revenue. They want to make you as addicted to the project as possible so that you can purchase all the merchandise, go to the live shows or buy the DVDs from the live shows if you cannot go there, or even if you went there, you are going to buy those, you are going to get the games, perhaps even participate in the gachas and pay real money to actually get stuff within the games. You are maybe going to watch the anime if it gets an anime adaptation. Maybe you are going to subscribe to a music subscription service to listen to the songs, or even you are going to purchase the physical CDs if you are like me, to actually support the project directly. They want to make the most money possible because they are investing a ton of money. We as fans will look at the project as, yay, they got Seiyuu A, Seiyuu B and Seiyuu C there. They are some of my favorites. But then you forget the other side. They were extremely expensive to be brought into the project. And every time that they record, they need to be paid. Every time that they sing, they need to be paid. Every time they attend to a project, they give an interview about the project, they have to talk about the character, they will charge the project. And that's a ton of money that you are spending as a project creator. So you want to make the most money even if you are bringing stars, because star power usually sells in an initial phase in which no one knows about the project. You need to bring stars so that you can bring new eyes to the project. If you are not bringing stars to the project, you need to spend so much money in marketing to cover for that exposure that you would get for free, let's say free with quotation marks, because we know they still have to pay for the superstar Seiyuu because they are really expensive, but you would get, or they would get, free publicity by having those famous Seiyuu basically in the groups, because some fans, some hardcore fans will check everything they do. But since you have that, the projects are thinking about making the most money possible. That's why they focus a lot. If the project is actually selling, they immediately try to develop a game with a gacha service, because they need to make money fast and make the best out of the fans being addicted to the project to actually make money out of them. This is marketing 101, easy to do, easy to execute. You just need to make people addicted to what you have, which is fairly easy when it comes to a 2D music project. There are certain formulas that are followed, and I've seen that the most popular 2D music projects usually follow those formulas, but I'm not going to dive into that because that's a completely different conversation. We were talking about the storytelling. So the projects right now don't focus on this idea of this project is going to start now and end in 2 years, for example, because they don't want to risk fans actually not wanting to commit because the project has an end date. And people don't want to feel heartbroken because the project ended and they know when it's going to end. On one end, from the marketing perspective yet again, if you say that the project starts at one point and ends at another, when you announce the end, people will get sort of nostalgic and you can see an increase or a bump in sales because you announced an end or a hiatus or something like that. Usually people will desperately try to buy something just to give a hint to the project that they should not go away. Or if the project announces really that they are going to end, they are going to get such a massive boost in sales because fans will get nostalgic and they want to get a last piece of merch for them, just as a memento in some way. So that's another marketing strategy that you can bring for a 2D music project. Once again, that's marketing 101, pretty easy, pretty simple to understand, and even if you don't work in marketing, this will make a lot of sense to you. So this is a big reason why 2D music projects don't actually embrace the idea of saying this is as a start and an end. They also don't announce that groups have a start and end, because imagine, for example, if Lolodi joined the project and they said, Movie had said, look, Lolodi is going to end in 2024, okay? Most people, I believe, would not even dare check them out because they would dread the end arriving, I feel. And most of them would actually start counting the months until the end and would actually be really hard on the group and the project for each release, because it wouldn't be up to their standards of what would be the best ending for the story, because fans like to opinate all the time, but the only ones that know how a story will end is actually the writers. So fans can only actually follow the story instead of dictating how the story goes. So yeah, imagine if that would have been said of Lolody. Lolody is going to end in 2024. Buckle up, because their music is going to be dramatic. They are going to end on a really weird way that will confuse a ton of fans. People would not even dare check the music, I feel. Even if they were, and they were, of course, we all know, unbelievably good, simply you wouldn't have as many people invested in their music as you had up until their end. And still to this date, we are almost 1 year since the group announced their end, you still have people coming across their music, falling in love with their music, and some people like me that still dread what happened and wish the group returns. Of course, we know they will not return, because the storyline is well done. I feel that, and this is the last point that I want to bring here to this episode, is that the perfect time to end the project is when the project is on a high. The perfect time to end the group is when the group is experiencing a high, because you want to remember them at their best. You don't want your last memory to be when the group barely sold any CDs, when their music was no longer good, when some Seiyuu left the cast, for example. I'm exaggerating here, but I'm bringing some options. Or when a project had a scandal and everything had to end all of a sudden. So you want the project to actually wrap up when they are at their highest in popularity. I feel that's the best way to remember a project, remember a group, is when they were at their best. That's why I feel that Lolody, although as a fan I was not happy with that, as a storyteller, as a writer myself, as an author myself, I feel that the story made sense to have a start, a middle and an end, and that is actually made it come full circle. Of course, you are going to say, but why should the project end when they are getting the most popularity now? Why should the project end when the groups are really, really famous and hitting the charts, for example, on Oricon? Why would you end something that is going well? I understand that point of view. However, I feel that I prefer to remember a project because they were amazing and they ended up everything neatly. All the storytelling points were covered, all the problems were solved, all the characters got what they deserved in their storylines, their individual ones. The group ended up having a really solid set of CD releases, really good music that from start to finish you could feel that there was an evolution. I prefer to have that to seeing a favorite project of mine simply disappearing at their lowest point without any word whatsoever about why it happened and if it ever is going to return, and there's an absolute silence by the Seiyuu. A good example is Perfection Noise. Some of you will be saying, what the heck is that? Yeah, the project was really getting a lot of momentum when it launched. People were excited about the project. The project quickly slowed down their intensity with the releases. It faded away, it disappeared. We never got a word from the project creators saying that the project ended. And while I wanted to remember the project when it was on its high, when it started, what I remember is how it faded away quietly without anyone knowing about it. That's the worst thing that can happen to the music project, in my opinion, or even to the group. That's the worst it can happen. So I want to remember my projects when they were on a high. I don't want to remember them when they were at a lowest point. And I sure as hell don't want a project to drag for so many years. There are at least 3 or 4 2D music projects at the moment that make no sense to still be around creating music when their storylines are mostly complete, but they still continue to release music, although it makes no sense whatsoever at the moment to release more music, because the storylines are basically wrapped up, or they were never truly well explored, although some people claim they were. So that's what I feel about 2D music projects, and when it is the right time to end a 2D music project. The best time is when it is on a high. The conversation that there is about the Hypnosis Mic franchise potentially wrapping up, I don't, honestly, from a business standpoint, I feel that they are not going to end. This is one of the most popular 2D music projects at the moment. Hip-hop was not really on the radar for 2D music fans up until Hypnosis Mic appeared. And they still took some time to actually get some attention from the public. It was around 5 months until the project started to get some traction on media, and most of the traction, believe me, was made because of marketing, not necessarily because of the music. There was a ton of complaining by some fans at the start of the project about the project itself and how Seiyuu rapping didn't make any sense, but King Records and Evil Line Records, which is basically the same label, they invested a ton of money in the marketing to make that project actually viable. So I feel from a business standpoint, that project is not going to end anytime soon, just because they invested so much money in there that it makes no sense whatsoever to actually end a project without recouping all the money that they invested, because you don't know how much they invested. They may say, for example, that they have 1 million people that use their game. Let's imagine, because I don't know the numbers, let's imagine that everyone has spent $1 in that game. They earned 1 million there. Still, is that enough to pay the Seiyuu, the music producers, the hip-hop stars, the big production of the live shows, and everything else that they have done? Because an anime series adaptation is extremely expensive, and with a cast like that, it is doubly or triply expensive. Then you have the development of a game, although it has gacha elements which end up paying the game to the developer. Still, you don't know how much money they invested in there. They need to license music, they need to license everything, they need to actually pay an extra license to the Seiyuu if it is not in their original contract, which I believe it wasn't, because the project was not even that confident that it would stick around for longer than a year, and it was on track to disappear if not for that magical month in which the groups ended up becoming really popular out of nowhere. So yeah, I feel that the project is not going to go away anytime soon from a business perspective. As a fan, I would love to have them stick around for longer. I love their music. I don't care about the anime series, to be quite honest. It made no sense whatsoever, and the storytelling in the franchise is not really something that gripped me. I do love the, let's say, the vibe that the project has and the focus that it brought to hip-hop music, and the fact that it showcased that Seiyuu can do it all, and that a veteran Seiyuu can rap, and they are amazing. This was the very first 2D music project to actually bring actively veteran Seiyuu to the cast. Not Seiyuu that ended up becoming old because they were part of the project for too long, to the point that they are now 50 because they started the project when they were 30. It was the fact that they really cast Seiyuu that were already in their 60s or late 50s into the project to actually bring some variety in the voices and even in the vibe. And this project has to be commended for that. So I feel that from a fan standpoint, I would love to have more music, but it makes sense if the project wants to end when the storytelling is wrapped up in a satisfactory way for the creators. I wouldn't say for the fans, because while it may be satisfactory to me as a fan, it may not be to you as a fan, and someone else may even think that the story was never good to begin with. Others may think that the story actually deserved 2 more chapters or something like that, which would be 2 more competitions or whatever. So they cannot cater to fans. They can cater the endings of the movie, and I feel that catering to that is, of course, another ploy to get more money, because you have 7 endings, I feel, or 8 endings, and you need to actually go to the theater to watch every single ending, because different places are airing different endings or whatever. That's a ploy to get more money. It's not because the movie is any good or something like that. As we all know, with the Hypnosis Mic franchise, the project is more about the music than it is about the story, and the music is actually the shining element in this franchise, honestly. The project about the hip-hop culture and hip-hop music. More so, of course, it has the individual storylines and the storylines for each group, but I feel that the strength was always in the music. So I feel, from a business standpoint, maybe the project is not going to end. I feel it's not going to end. They can still make a ton of money with the project. There are too many fans addicted to the project. There are too many fans addicted to the games. So I feel that they are not going to end. When we look from a fan perspective, me, as a fan, I'm not a hardcore fan. I'm not a hardcore fan of anything, because being a hardcore fan means you are obsessive, and obsessive people lose sight of what is good, what is wrong, and what is bad, and whatever in between. So I look at these from a neutral perspective of, if the project wants to end, they are now at their highest in popularity. It would make sense. After all that we talked about in this episode, it would make sense. I would love to remember the Hypnosis Mic franchise as a project that started really struggling to get attention. It was an underdog, like a rapper, trying to showcase their talent underground, slowly starting to get their audience, and then popping off and starting to get a ton of attention, and then wrapping up with a legacy, making a difference, and you can remember them on a high. I feel that if they wanted to end now, I believe, after the movie, would be the perfect time. From a business perspective, I feel that they are not going to end. That's my thing. And that's the part in which I actually feel more inclined to, because if I was in the business and this was, for example, my project, and if I had invested money in here, I would want to recoup my money as much as possible and even make an extra bit of cash from fans, even at the expense of the project actually repeating itself or not bringing anything new to the table. Which is what happens usually with 2D music projects, mind you. This is really common. So, yeah, when we talk about when is the perfect time to end the 2D music project, my conclusion is when the project is on a high. And if the movie for Hypnosis Mic feels like the perfect ending, then maybe it is an ending. But for example, what we got with Lolo-D, it didn't feel like an ending. It felt weird as heck. Maybe because we didn't get a notice saying, yeah, it's going to end, pay attention. Maybe because we were too invested, and for a group that was so impactful, so brilliant, so dramatic, the ending didn't feel anything like that. It felt different. From a storytelling point, the story itself was well written. The way it was executed, music-wise, it was not up to the perfection that Lolo-D had given us up until then. So yeah, those are two different things. Of course, Lolo-D are no longer around. I love the group. Hypnosis Mic is still around, and I feel they will be around for a long time. But I hope that you enjoyed this episode. This is a really weird vibe to this episode, because this is a bit different in the way that I'm actually presenting the information and everything else. We are not going to have an outro because I feel I already talked plenty, but I would love to know from your end, when do you feel is the best time to wrap up a 2D music project? I know that we, as fans, we don't want the project to end. It makes sense because we love the music, we want more of that, we want more of our favorite Seiyuu, we want more of our favorite groups and their dorky activities and everything else, we want more. But putting that aside, when do you feel it makes sense for a project to end, to wrap up, to bid goodbye? And when was the last time that you actually followed a 2D music project and it ended in a satisfactory way for you, in which you felt that, yeah, the story wrapped up pretty well, we actually got a satisfactory ending, and there are no loose ends, we actually had a ton of fun, and it feels like we had a story from start to finish. I would love for you to share that with me, because I'm going to be honest, I don't have any examples of that. All the projects that I love ended by disappearing silently with no one knowing about them. So that's the worst way to remember a project. The worst way. So yeah, thank you very much for watching or listening to this episode. Once again, if you have any comments, please leave those in the comments below. Thank you very much, of course, for listening to this episode. If you are listening to it on a podcast listening platform, please remember to give it a thumbs up or basically review it. And if you are on YouTube, please remember to give it a thumbs up or subscribe to the channel if you are still not subscribed to it. There's tons of more content like these, and especially content in which I don't bring any script whatsoever like this episode. So if you enjoyed this one, I have plenty more for you in the backlog, as well as many more episodes to come. So yeah, thank you very much for watching this episode, and I'll see you guys in the next one.